Welcome to the second episode of the Freaky Fauna Files podcast. We're your hosts,
the chicken,
and the egg, when you'll never know which one comes first.
Hey, I'm the chicken. This week, I'll be the one kicking off our discussion over some freaky fauna. And rather than focusing on the region, we are actually going to be focusing on a particular adaptation. For this episode, we did research on animals that have crazy regenerative powers. We will dive into the biology, ecology, and history of three critters: the axolotl, the planarian, and the deer. Unfortunately, these animals are not super dangerous, so rather than having the danger zone at the end of the episode, we are going to be entering into the safe zone.
The safe zone.
The safe zone, where we will discuss how these animals' superpowers could contribute or have contributed to human medicine. So for this episode, could humans potentially grow back limbs?
As always, we're going to be posting all of the fauna that we reference in today's podcast, as well as the references at which we did our research on our socials. You can find us on most podcast streaming services and our socials at Freaky Fauna Files.
Perfect. Cool. So to begin, we're going to start off with the axolotl. And these guys are probably one of my personal favorites. I do have two of them in a tank at home. We have Charlie and Scooter, Mr. Scooter. Yes, yeah, they are two and they are chilling. So to give a little bit of information about the axolotl, the scientific name is Ambystoma mexicanum. And the breakdown for that comes from atl, which means water, and xolotl, which means monster. So the name literally translates into the aquatic monster, which doesn't make a lot of sense because these guys are freaking adorable.
They're just little guys.
Little monsters, if anything. They are also sometimes called the Mexican walking fish, which is kind of goofy because they are not fish, and even though they have limbs, they don't walk very well, even in the water. They are a relatively newer critter, and by newer, I just mean that they've only been around for about 10,000 years. So even though that's a long time, if you look at all of the other animals that we have out here that we'll discuss later in the podcast, it's pretty new. It's also important to note that the name axolotl is also implied to any full-grown larva of a tiger salamander that has not lost its external gills yet. And I'll talk a little bit more about the external gills and all of that later, but axolotls can sometimes be used to refer to baby tiger salamanders. Moving on to mythology, the axolotl is believed to be the Aztec god of fire and lightning, Xolotl. And I did have to look up the pronunciation for that. But Xolotl was viewed as a being that defies death and is often associated with the idea of movement and life. He is the brother of Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec and Mayan creator god that is the patron of rain, science, agriculture, and more. He's typically depicted as that green quetzal bird and with a serpent body. In fact, that documentary on Netflix, The Ancient Apocalypse, they actually talk about
I did see that.
Quetzalcoatl a lot.
That was cool.
It was cool. Highly recommend. But the story goes, to be nice and short, that Xolotl refused to die by sacrifice, so he fled the executioner in a few different ways. The first way was that he hid in cornfields, and he did this by morphing into a corn plant with two stalks. All right. Eventually, he was discovered, so he ran again and morphed into a double Maggie plant, I think? Maggie? Mm. Either way, it's a member of the agave family. And, of course, discovered again. So, for the last time, he escaped into the water and actually morphed into an axolotl. Hence the name axolotl. He did reach his unfortunate end here because the executioner found him and he was murked. So that's all that I have for the mythology of the lotl. Getting into the habitat, lotls only occur in a couple of places. The main ones being Lake Xochimilco and Lake Chalco in southern Mexico City. And they are rarely seen in the wild, with only about 50 to 1,000 left, which is not a lot. This actually makes them critically endangered in the wild. However, thanks to us and people like me, their numbers are thriving. Thriving in captivity. As of May 2023, about 1 million people have an axolotl.
What?
Yeah, if not two.
Wow, if not two.
Which is not a lot if you're thinking about like cats and dogs and everything, but it's super impressive if you're thinking about, one, how many is left in the wild, and two, reptiles and amphibians. Not a lot of people like to have those, so it's more of an exotic pet. But still, 1 million's a lot.
Someone with an axolotl until you guys.
Yeah, I have the two, and then even my dad has, I think, a two.
Really?
Yeah, I think he has two. Mm-hmm.
Weird.
There are mixed feelings surrounding axolotls as pets, typically due to people not knowing what they're getting into. And you see this a lot when it comes to owning reptiles and amphibians and all of that good stuff. You just really need to make sure that you know the critter and know what care is going to be required to keep them alive. Getting into the biology, lotls can live anywhere from 10 to 15 years. And that is super important to keep in mind, especially if you're deciding when you want to have one as a pet or not.
Yeah, that's a long time.
It is a long time, right?
That's a commitment.
It's not just like a little goldfish. I think goldfish can actually last
like
for a while.
1 week.
Oh, 1 week.
That's as long as mine have lasted.
Why don't you say that you're just not very good at taking care of fish then? They lay anywhere from 300 to 1,000 eggs.
Lord.
Yes. And reach maturity in 6 months. I've actually experienced them laying a lot of eggs.
What do you do with the eggs?
You can try to keep them alive. They're kind of finicky. They're kind of sensitive, as most amphibians and other exotic critters are. But the average lengths are 6 to 18 inches, or 15 to 45 centimeters, which is a little bit over a foot. They weigh 2 to 8 ounces, or 56 to 226 grams. And they are mainly known for the permanent retention of the larval features as an adult, otherwise known as paedomorphosis. So, paedomorphosis, there's a couple of ways that animals are able to retain their larval features. Essentially, like as they're going through their life cycle, they basically stop at a certain point and they don't lose the baby features. It would be as if a frog, like a tadpole, never lost its aquatic features and never turned into a land.
Its tail.
Yeah, never lost its tail and just stayed in the water all the time. That's kind of what's happening with paedomorphosis. The lotl actually uses neoteny. Essentially, this means that they keep their feathery external gills, their functional lungs, a tail, a body fin, and lack of movable eyelids, actually.
So you say feathery external gills. What?
Yeah.
Can you describe that? What would that look like?
So imagine like a quill.
A feather dust?
Yeah, like a quill, like a feather quill. It's like they have 6 feather quills sticking out of their heads. So it's super fluffy. And there's a reason why they're fluffy, and I'll talk about that when I'm talking about their respiration. But they're very beautiful, actually. They can be different colors, and it's actually one of my favorite parts about the lotl is probably their gills. Just because it's cool that they have both the external gills and functional lungs. Like, they have both. It's not just one or the other. So that makes them freaky in and of themselves.
Freaky fauna.
Freaky fauna. What's even cooler, actually, about this is that scientists and lotls, man. There is a study published back in 1923, and we can actually link this, where scientists decided to take some axolotls, cut out their thyroids.
Oh.
They then administered iodine to them and recorded the results. The lotls that were subjected to treatment ended up metamorphosizing again, which resulted in them losing those juvenile traits. So essentially, if you treat a lotl with iodine, with their thyroids removed, then they can actually turn into a tiger salamander.
So is the thyroid what's controlling the hormone to keep juvenile
It was one of them.
external gills?
It was one of them, yeah. So there's cutting out the thyroid, and then there is another way that they did it as well. But they had to cut out something in order for this to generally work. And they did mess around with whether or not it was going to be inorganic or organic iodine that they used. And I think what they settled on was that it was the inorganic iodine. I'd have to go back and double check.
Weirdly specific?
Mm-hmm, yeah. Please don't try this at home with your Lottles if you have one. I don't think that's very nice. But yeah, we can, if you are interested in reading that, we will link that. For the axolotls' general physical features, they are typically dark brown with black speckling, just like my Charlie and Scooter. But there are also albinos, which were primarily bred for the pet trade, white mutants, and color mutants. So we'll see like yellows, coppers, all sorts of really cool colors. And one thing that I did find out that was really cool was they are actually able to shift their hue to different shades in order to better fit their environment. So they can actually camouflage a little bit.
Chameleon
like
Lottles?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if they do that via chromatophores or how exactly they're able to shift their colors. But it's interesting either way. They also have teeny weeny legs.
They're pretty pathetic.
They're so... I should just post a video of Charlie and Scooter just floating in the bubble machine or something.
In the bubbles.
Just vibing. But anyways, they have teeny weeny legs and feet with the tail that makes up the majority of their length. So the tail is really most of the Lottle. Typically it can be like 6 to 8 inches long, quite long. They also have fins that will line their backs and bellies, and it'll start at their hind legs and move all the way down to the tip of their tail, almost like a little fin, or like a little, obviously it's a fin, like a little rudder. For the diet, they are cute, voracious, and efficient predators. They eat anything they can fit their mouths on. This includes worms, mollusks, small fish, and other salamanders even.
Jeez.
Yeah, they're night hunters, so they'll take shelter amongst aquatic vegetation during the day. And then whenever they're hunting at night, it's so funny to watch, but they'll just open up their mouth and they just suction. They're just like, and they just suck in whatever is there. So this is fun to watch, especially whenever you are feeding them a worm. But you have to be careful because sometimes they will suck up pebbles and other rocks as well. So if you do keep them, you have to keep the floor either bare or make sure that there's no pebbles that they can accidentally inhale while they're eating. There are not many predators that go after them. The main ones are like storks, herons, carp, and tilapia, so like big fish, birds. Really, humans are their biggest threat, and that's due to urbanization, pollution, all of that good stuff. And we're just making their habitat even smaller. I mean, they're down to those 2 lakes, and because of changes, they are dwindling. For mating, the males and females do a little dance. Male drops a cone-shaped mass with a sperm cap, and that's in quotes, that the female will then collect the cone on her tail to then go around and fertilize her massive eggs.
A gift for you.
A gift.
Thank you.
Yeah, and these eggs were all over. They were on like our water filter. They were everywhere. They just tuck them. So, pretty simple mating. They have 4 different methods of breathing, which I didn't know about. They can use their fancy external gills and the feathering. The reason why it's so beneficial is because it actually increases the surface area, allowing an increase of gas diffusion into the blood. Another one that Lottles will use that I didn't actually know was subcutaneous breathing. So they can actually breathe through their skins just like the tiger salamander and just like frogs. They'll use their super thin, moist skin to allow gas diffusion into the blood vessels. It's important to note that even though they can do this type of breathing, they still can't breathe on land.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's very weak. It's not an ideal form for them. Another one that is common in fish that we see in Lottles is buccal pumping. This is when they basically open and close their mouth, to allow water to pass through them and go to the gills. And finally, the most least efficient way are those lungs. So those lungs aren't fully developed, but they can be used. They just can't hold a ton of oxygen. And finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about with the lottles is the regeneration. And the regeneration, I'm only going to talk about a little bit here, and I'll get more into it when we get into the safe zone. But I just want to point out that they're one of the few tetrapods, aka four-footed creatures, that are capable of regenerating complex anatomical structures. So when an axolotl gets injured, it is able to use blank slate cells in their body that they have to recreate that structure identically. So whatever they lost, they can completely recreate it. This includes the exact blood vessels, connections, everything. Everything is done. So one thought is that their ability to regenerate is due to the fact that they stay young. So it's like they drank the fountain of youth, stayed young, and in doing so, gained super regenerative abilities. The other theory is that they're just really basic with simple immune systems, so it doesn't take much for them to regenerate. But that's all I'm going to really talk about for that for now. We'll get into it in just a second. But anyways, if you decide that you have to have one of these guys like I did, please, please, please do your research on how to take care of them. We want to be responsible conservationists, not careless ones.
Very cool. I will say your lottles are super cute, super weird. I have a picture of their dog, Nina. She sits on the beanbag chair next to it and just lovingly watches the little lottles.
Just gazes at
cute.
them. Just gazes.
Today, I want to talk about the Planarian, which is a flatworm. They are super cute, super squish, and we're going to go into some things.
Squish.
So they have a couple different variations. You can find them in the ocean as marine planarians. You can find freshwater planarians, and they can also live on land.
All over the place.
Oh, yeah. They typically are in freshwater rivers, streams, ponds. You can find them under rocks, leaves, in shallow water. Basically anywhere that you would think you would find a worm or a salamander, that's where you're going to find these guys.
Awesome.
They're pretty small, so they're about 3 to 15 millimeters, which is anywhere from 0.1 to half an inch long.
So that's like what, half your first knuckle on your thumb?
Yeah, just your little thumb. They're just little guys.
Little guys. Little flat
but they're
guys.
actually can grow about 30 centimeters long or about a foot.
Damn.
Which is gross.
So it can grow as big as an axolotl.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be weird to see.
I'll talk a little bit more about what these guys actually look like, but a foot long squishy worm, they're about an inch wide, so they're not like the typical earthworm that you're thinking of.
No.
It's a 1 inch long flatworm.
Yeah,
They're
it's
called
not round.
flatworms.
They're not round either.
So they eat protozoans, they eat tiny snails, worms, insect larvae, other crustaceans, basically anything small and crunchy that they can get their hands on. And they use mucus as kind of like a trap to...
Love that.
Yeah, stick their prey and munch on them. So a little bit more about the biology. So like I said, they are called Planarian flatworms. They have flat, arrow-shaped heads connected to a long, flat, like I said, 1 inch wide body. They can be black, brown, blue, gray, or white. They have 2 little eye spots on top of their heads, which are absolutely adorable.
They look so cute.
They're like cross-eyed. They
look like
on
you
top
put
of their
googly
head.
eyes. Like you put googly eyes on a flat arrow.
Yes.
That's what it looks
Think
like.
of like an arrowhead that you would find in like the ground.
Yeah, the grass or something.
They have these cute little eye spots, which are used for sight, not necessarily the sight that we think of, but rather just changes in light. They have 2 little ear holes on the side of the head, which are used for pretty much the same thing. Any sensitivity to movement, also chemoreceptors, so any change in chemicals nearby can let them know who's there.
That's cool.
On the underside, they have a typical mouth, and the mouth is covered with cilia, which are hair-like projections, little skinny hairs that they use not only to kind of grasp and take food into their mouths, but they also have cilia on the underside of their body, which allows them to move.
Well, thank God that their mouth isn't filled with teeth, because that would be horrifying.
Yeah, then they'd be like little ringworms.
Then they would be really freaky fauna.
They're pretty... They're pretty basal creatures. They don't have a circulatory system, and they don't have a respiratory system. So, just like the lottles, they have subcutaneous breathing. They breathe through their body walls. So, oxygen is exchanged with the environment through their skin. They eat with their mouths pretty normally, but they don't really have a gut or a complex intestine. So, whatever they munch on kind of just diffuses into the body to feed the tissues. Their intestines is called a blind sac. Basically means that there's only one cavity. They have no exit. They don't have an anus or anything.
One hole.
Whatever comes in goes out the same way. Kind of like...
just a blind hole.
Yeah.
Like a... No, never mind.
So whatever they eat also comes out of the same orifice. They move by beating their little cilia. If you've ever seen bacteria under a microscope, they do the same thing. They have like these little finger hair-like projections that they glide along along their film of mucus. So kind of like a snail, they're just scooting along their mucus. And if needed, they can kind of wiggle like a snake using muscles found inside the body membrane. They can produce sexually and asexually, which is more of what we're going to talk about in the safe zone. So
funny we're talking about sex in the safe zone.
Well, we are practicing safe sex here.
We are.
I'll talk more about how they produce asexually later. That's pretty much what this regenerative episode is going to be about. But in terms of reproducing sexually, they are called hermaphrodites, which means that each and every individual possesses both male and female reproductive organs. And the way that they mate is that they do mutual insemination. So you kind of...
Give me a little, I give you a little.
Yeah, you kind of cuddle up to your bud. It's not a male or a female, so it doesn't matter. Anybody can be my best friend.
Just non-binary kings and queens.
And they trade sperm. So there is some genetic sharing there because you're not using your own sperm as asexual reproduction. You're using your neighbor's. So I give you some sperm, you give me some sperm, we fertilize, and we go about our ways.
So win-win.
Yeah.
Win-win.
Eggs develop inside the body for a period of time and then are laid in an exterior cocoon at which they will hatch weeks later.
Cool.
These guys are pretty simple. I don't have too much to talk about for the exterior biology. A lot of it is going to be later when I talk about their regenerative properties.
Yeah, there's not much about the flatworms just because they're very simple. Simple little worms.
They are. But I do have another creature for you. We're actually going to talk about deer.
Getting out of the water.
We are. Today, or right now at least, we're on the land. Just because deer are so well known, I'm not going to go too deep into their biology, their habitat, their diet. Yeah. But we're going to focus on antlers. So antlers can be regenerated, and it's a whole process. But fun fact, antlers and horns are not synonymous. Horns,
I didn't even know that, really.
Exactly. You would be incorrect.
Oh.
So horns are found on sheep, goats, and cows. And horns have tissue-covered bones, so they are not shed. They are bones
I think I did know
that are an extension of the organism.
Okay.
While antlers are, it's kind of like a bone, but it is made of calcium and phosphorus, and they are shed every year.
So that's like the big difference between like a ram's horns versus like a deer's antlers. Is like whether or not they're shedding and what they're made out of, really?
Yeah. Horns are an extension of the body, while antlers are a growth that are shed. So antlers grow pretty fast. They grow 1/4 of an inch a day. That's a lot. A day.
That's a lot.
So they are full of nerves and blood vessels, which I'll talk a little bit more about what the nerves and blood vessels are for. They're kind of like a little biological clock. But antlers are covered in like a hairy tissue That is called the velvet. The velvet is also shed depending on the time of the year and the age of the antler.
I feel like when you say velvet and hairy skin, my immediate thought is like a peach.
Yeah.
Like, is it like fuzzy like a peach?
Yes. Yeah. If you've ever seen videos like deer will like rub their heads against a tree because the velvet is itchy. It's like
that makes
a
sense.
scab that you want to get off.
It's like loose skin, or like flaky skin, like from sunburn.
Light. It's called velvet because that's exactly what it looks like. It looks like a peachy velvet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cute.
So an antler grows from a little nub called a pedicel, and a pedicel is like I said, it's a nub on the frontal bone of the skull of the deer. And the growth and development of an antler is in response to a specific hormone being released. So, depending on the age and the time of year, a hormone will be released and cells will start to gather at the pedicel, and begin to grow a quarter of an inch each day.
So it's like going through puberty, essentially. Like
Yeah,
the deer's
you don't grow
puberty,
boobs,
like you get hormones.
Antlers.
You get no boobs, no dropping. You know, it is just horns.
Wrong.
Antlers.
Wrong.
Man, I'm actually really gonna have to correct myself on that moving forward.
So I mentioned this concept of a biological clock. It's really cool. So the deer's brain has a biological clock that responds to the period of light and dark of each day. So this also has to do with seasons. That's why antlers fall at certain seasons and they grow at certain seasons. The proportion of light to dark of each day controls the secretion of testosterone in males.
Cool.
And testosterone is the hormone that is released to begin antler growth. So like I said, it's directly proportional to seasons, so the less light there is, the slower the growth and the end of the antler growth period.
So I wonder what would happen if, like, deers were in the parts of, like, Antarctica and stuff where it's dark for, long periods of time? Like, do they just not grow?
There was a study, so they did artificial light, like periods of light.
Cool.
And if you extend the amount of light, it actually messes up the testosterone because you're kind of messing up the whole seasonal daylight savings time.
Yeah, the body's getting mad.
So they did like 12 hours a day and 12 hours of night, and it stunted the growth because that's not correct. They also did one where the deer was exposed to like a ridiculous, it wasn't a full 24 hours of light, but it was more than usual. I'll just say
more than like naturally occurring.
I think it was like
places.
16 hours of light. Damn. And at first it grew a lot because you got a lot of daylight, and let's say you're beginning springtime, then that would be normal. So you got a lot of testosterone being produced and you got a lot of antler growth. But continuous exposure to 16 hours of daylight messed everything up. The timing and the secretion of testosterone kind of was stunted and just basically like quit. So instead of the natural tapering off as the days get shorter, it just like panicked and stopped producing
Just a bored admission. It's like, we don't know what to do.
Abort. So, like I said, later in the season, by late summer, early fall, there is less light, so the blood vessels found within the antlers will kind of die off, and antlers will not be fed the proper nutrients from those blood vessels, so naturally they begin to fall off. It forms a visible kind of...
Like a scab?
No, like a line that where the antler can break off, and that's why you'll also see your deer rubbing against it. Is that during the end of the season, their biological clock says it's gonna fall off. It kind of gets itchy, like you're trying to peel off a scab.
Like it's ready to go, and it's letting you know. Essentially,
exactly.
Your body is like, get it off.
Get it off.
Get it off. It's time to go.
They'll rub against trees and they'll get the antlers off. It does, since it is a part of a tissue, it does leave a bloody wound, but that scabs over pretty quickly. It's supposed to happen, so it'll scab over.
It's meant to happen.
Another unique thing about antler growth is that it is related to bodily injury. So if you get a wound on your back left leg, then your right antler will be stunted.
What?
Yeah. So vice versa.
That's cool.
So if you ever see a very lopsided deer, it is more likely than not that there's an injury to the opposite back leg.
Whoa.
Right?
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
But yeah, so if you ever see a lopsided deer, check for an injury because more often than not, that is an explanation. It's not uncommon to see the lopsided just because deer are hunted animals and they are also prey animals. So it's quite a common occurrence. But that is what I have for the deer and the planarians. Just a little bit to preface the purpose of this episode, which is going to be regeneration, stem cells, things like that. So we'll hop right into the safe zone.
The safe zone.
Contrary to the danger zone.
The danger zone. To start off the safe zone, I'm going to begin with the axolotl. So axolotls are actually all a rave in the medical industry right now due to their insane ability to regenerate everything. This includes bits of their brain. So like literally there were some experiments where scientists cut out parts of the brain and it was able to reestablish and come back.
That's crazy.
It's insane. So as you can imagine, there are numerous applications for this for us squishy, non-regenerative humans. And we actually do have a little bit of regeneration, just not nearly. Before getting into it, I do want to discuss how exactly axolotls can regenerate. I brushed over it a little bit in the biology, but I'm going to do like a step-by-step for this just so that you guys can understand how the process works and maybe you guys can see some applications in there as well. But essentially what happens is the axolotl will become injured and lose some type of its body or an organ or something. And immediately the immune system sends clots of blood cells to stop any of the bleeding at the injury site. And once it's stopped, there is a thin layer of cells that form, and this is actually called the wound epidermis. And the epidermis, we have one too, it's just the top layer of skin. So they just think of it like a little covering.
A little scab?
Almost, yeah, almost. But it's not the same sense as
A crunchy
scab that we would think of. Yeah. So you've got the wound epidermis. The wound epidermis, the cells within that, then begin to rapidly divide. And eventually it forms a cone-shaped structure. I don't know what's up with axolotls and cone-shaped. This is the second time.
Here's my cone-shaped sperm.
Here's my cone-shaped sperm.
Here's my cone-shaped scab.
Here's my cone-shaped wound. It's merely a flesh wound. But it forms a cone-shaped structure called the blastema. And the blastema is thought to be made up of bone, cartilage, muscle, and or other stem cell-like cells. Okay, so they're not exactly like stem cells, like humans have stem cells, but they're similar. These are like those blank slate cells that I was talking about. With the blastema, though, there are limits. You can't have a blank slate cell that was like turned into muscle, and then it is then turned again into skin. Like there are limits. Like once it's turned or differentiated into whatever.
Then it'll stay that.
Yeah, then it'll stay it. So you'll get more division of the blastema, and those stem-like cells will then be redifferentiated into whatever they need to be. So like say you lose part of your stomach, those blastema cells are going to, some of those blastema cells are going to turn into stomach cells. And they'll even use the exact same genetic code and everything. But the redifferentiated cells will continue to grow as well and multiply, a lot of multiplying, before eventually they flatten out to create an identical copy. And again, it is identical. It is the same thing. There is no way you can tell the difference between the two.
Oh, cool.
So it's way more than like lizards because you cut off a lizard's tail and it also regenerates, but it'll have differences. That's not what happens with the lotl. Like it'll create the exact same structure that the original genetic code told it to create, which is super cool. But anyways, how does this apply to us? Well, as I mentioned a little bit ago, that humans have slight regenerative capabilities ourselves with skin, fingertips, and even part of our liver, but we are greatly behind. So a lot of researchers are looking at the lotl for hints on how to kickstart human regeneration, whether that be via medication or surgery. And honestly, reading through some of the experiments that they do on the lotls, I feel bad. So scientists, I'll tell you a few different ways that they're approaching it. One of them is scientists are going and they are looking at what could stop an axolotl from regenerating. So they answer this question by interrupting different processes prior to amputation. So what they'll do is, like, before cutting off an arm, they would inject that lotl with something that would disrupt its immune system.
Rude.
Or they would use the super precision and sever the nerves in that limb.
That is awful.
So those are the two ways. They affected the immune system and the nervous system within that limb prior to amputating. And they actually found out that once they did that, the limbs did not regenerate. And it was actually found that the macrophages, they're a type of white blood cell that can engulf and digest microorganisms, dead cells, debris, etc. They're basically like the trash can. They clean up everything. But it was found that the macrophages in the axolotl's immune system, when it was stunted, the amputated limb would only grow scar tissue.
Oh.
The same was found when they severed the nerves in the limb. Another question that scientists will use as their approach was, how many times could an axolotl regrow a particular limb? So they did this exactly how you think, and the answer is 5.
The answer is 5.
And the answer is 5. So that's another one. And then more recently, scientists have begun to look at the lotl's genetic code to see exactly what is turning on or off to allow for this type of regenerative ability. And since the axolotl and humans share a distant common ancestor, way back, that's not recent, but we do share a common ancestor. And because of so, there is a chance that our genetic code has similar capabilities. So it might not be to the same extent, but they have it, and it seems like that would be something that would be retained.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a good chance that we have it, and that's more recently what, scientists are getting into. So the bigger picture is, how does this apply to us? Mm-hmm. Well, scientists know now that the biggest problem with human regeneration comes down to exactly what we were talking about, how quickly the scar tissue forms. So some have actually pondered whether administering drugs to prevent this scar tissue buildup from ever occurring, if regen would occur. So it's saying if you get injured, you immediately start producing cells to start creating scar tissue. Lotl's, they don't have that. They don't have something that just immediately goes to start creating scar tissue. So scientists are starting to look at how they can slow down or stunt our quickness to start developing scar tissue.
So even if you slow down our scar tissue development, do we have the genetic code to regenerate?
So that they don't know yet.
Okay. Because even if you slow down my scar tissue and my scabs, we're just going to be waiting on nothing.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. Yeah. And there's actually a researcher that I found, James Godwin. He is someone who is currently leading the way when it comes to looking at lotl's, 4 clues to this. And a 2021 research paper published by him and others shows how the similarities between the immune responses in mammals and axolotls could ultimately lead to enhanced tissue repair.
Oh,
so
cool.
Basically he's saying that he has found that our responses are similar to each other. There are just slight differences, and that slight differences has to do with our scar tissue development. And so for him, he actually says that his future solution could be as simple as, quote, topical hydrogel at the site of a wound that is laced with a modulator that changes the behavior of human macrophages, remember those white blood cells, to be more like those of the axolotls.
A topical cream
Yes.
on my wound, my flesh wound.
Yes.
And it eventually will grow back.
Yeah. So
because I don't start immediately producing
scar tissue. Yeah. That is what he's looking at. So so imagine you cut off the tip of your finger. You'd put this hydrogel on it, right? And that hydrogel is kind of forming that wound epidermis, right? Preventing it from happening. And then I guess the macrophages would eat up the scar tissue or just prevent it from happening.
So macrophages are good or bad?
Good. We need the macrophages. Because for lotls, whenever they were doing the science, whenever they disrupted the immune system, scar tissue developed. So like when the macrophages were hindered, they were not able to regenerate. So essentially the topical would change our macrophages to be more like the axolotl macrophages. And boom, we have a whole new finger. That is a hope. That is a hope with lotls and humans.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think there's potential, but what do I know?
For sure, yeah. There's a lot of people looking into it. They're also immune to cancer, which is something that
Lucky ducks.
that people need to look into a little bit more.
I guess that makes sense. If they can just regenerate any part of their body, they can get rid of cancer cells.
Yeah, and just regenerate good ones.
Whatever's infected.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so maybe if we figure out the regen, we can figure out cancer.
That's cool.
Who knows?
Cure to cancer is Charlie and Scooter.
The Charlie and Scooter to the rescue.
You could name your cure for cancer after them.
Scoot. The Scoot.
The Tutor.
The Tutor. The Tutor cure. The Tutor.
Or the Charter. Charlie Scooter.
That's right.
Charter.
Charter's already a word. Maybe Scarly.
That plays off of scar tissue. That's fun.
Oh, okay.
That's fun.
All right, we're getting there. Look for it in the future.
Well, that was really cool. I have some similar things. You touched on some vocab words that I'm going to include. But the planarian is kind of similar. They're similar in the way that you can just chop off a limb and it'll grow back. But let's get started at the very beginning. So Aristotle was the first to describe, well, he was said to be the first, who knows.
Yeah,
he was said to be the first to scientifically describe the phenomenon of regeneration by studying lizard tails. So you touched on it, they grow back, they're not the same. Aristotle was like, whoa, we can't do that. Planarians come into the picture around 860 AD. They were said to be first described by Yu Yang Tzu.
Wait, 860 AD? That just hit me. That is old.
Yes.
I said 10,000 years
no,
for the
yours
lotl.
are babies.
Mine are 860 AD.
I mean, they're the most basal organism you can ever imagine. So 860 AD, this Chinese text describes what we think are planarians. He describes an animal called the tuku, and they're
cute.
Quote, easily separated into several pieces when cut. Okay, so
they were just bored cutting a worm.
Yeah,
like,
he just sees one. He's like, chop. Whoa, 2 worms?
2 worms?
Whoa. So, he initially described them, but the birth of the study of planarians and their regenerative processes is most frequently associated with Paulus, who encountered them while exploring the Ural Mountains in the late 18th century. So fast forward, now we're starting to gain awareness of these little guys. We're in the 18th century. And Darwin himself in the 19th century also recorded the regenerative processes of planarians.
So they're well documented. Yeah. Essentially. This is not like a new...
hundreds of years.
New thing. Like we have known about the potential of these guys for... Yes. Quite some time is what I'm getting.
It's not until relatively recently that we had the idea of using them in human medicine. I mean, here we are in 19th century in Darwin. He described them as, quote, immortal under the edge of the knife.
That's cool. That's
just
cool.
like you said, you can cut them, they grow a new one, they're immune to cancer, they're immune to injuries. And so I talked about their sexual reproduction via mutual insemination earlier. Now we're going to dive into how they asexually reproduce, and it is by fission. So these little groups of cells, they're called neoblasts. They are what holds stem cells that have the capability of growing in identical planarian. So neoblasts are they are abundant in adult stem cells. They are found all over the body. So and they're undifferentiated, meaning that they can turn into whatever they need to be. They can turn into a brain cell if your brain is hurt. They can turn into a skin cell if you get a scrape, etc.
So it's like the blank slate cells in the lottles.
Blank slate. They can turn into whatever they need to be. Neuroblasts are required for regenerating because they contain these adult stem cells. And I thought this was really cool. This shows you the power of a single neoblast or a single stem cell. So as little as 1/279th, whatever fraction that is. So 1/279. That proportion of a cut of a planarian can be made, and that fraction will regenerate into a complete worm over a few weeks.
How do we even put 1/279th in perspective?
I don't know. I would say if you cut your nail.
Or like a hair cell, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, if I trim my nail and I place it in a petri dish, several weeks later you will get a whole new human being.
That's cool.
Yeah. So 1/279th of the organism
it's like taking
can be
one
cut.
tooth. It's like one tooth.
Yeah, and
one
it'll
bone.
grow a complete organism.
Cool.
So let's see. It also has to do with physiological regeneration. So while they said it's immortal under the knife, it's also immortal just by repairing its anatomy. So as it naturally ages, it can repair its brain, its body, any sort of cancerous tissue, anything that is needed. It can be regenerated through these neoblasts.
I wonder if we could look at them for aging too.
Yeah. So I'll go into that in a little bit for the human impact, but that's a really good point. Aging, just in terms of cell death, skin cancer due to the effect of the sun, all of these could be replaced if you had such prolific adult stem cells all over your body.
Yeah.
And you mentioned we do have some stem cells that can regrow your liver, but the difference between humans and planarian stem cells is that ours are predetermined based off of where they're found.
Got it.
So your stem cells in your liver can only be a liver. Your stem cells in your fingertips can only be a fingertip. The difference with these is that your planarian stem cell on, let's say, the tip of its tail can regrow an entire organism. It won't just regrow a tail.
That makes sense.
They also maintain their polarity. So I'm going to call dorsal ventral polarity, which is basically front to back, top to bottom. The adult stem cells have some sort of genetic code. You mentioned the Hox genes. So Hox genes are the genetic code that tells you where on your body things should grow. So a Hox gene designates your arms as being on top of your body rather than growing out of your kneecap or something like that.
It makes sure that we fit the mold,
of a human. Exactly.
Yeah.
We all look the same. We all have hands and feet in the same place. So they maintain their polarity. So when you cut a teeny tiny sliver, it's going to grow outwards from that sliver. Let's say I cut it off right in his midsection. So that midsection won't just form a head and then a body and then a tail. It'll form the midsection and then on top of that the head and below that the body. Does that make sense?
Cool, yeah.
So whatever piece you're cutting off maintains its location on the body.
It's orientation. Yeah. It's not messing it up any other type of way.
Yeah. So that was a little bit on how they themselves can reproduce and regenerate. And the human impact is just like the axolotl. So I said that humans do not form the same blastomas that axolotl and planarians do. We have more of a primitive material. We do contain some sort of stem cells, but they differentiate based off of where they are. Like I said, a liver cell can only grow a new liver. We're trying our best. There are a couple studies that are definitely looking into planarians. I mean, we've known about them since the early
860 AD.
860 AD. But it seems like we're just now starting to get a grip on the importance of the application of these blastomas.
I think it could just be, too, that it's becoming easier for us to get into the microbiology of all of this. I mean, it is a very basal organism, and it's not as easy as, like, looking at a dog and stuff like that. Like, you're getting down to the nitty-gritty. Like, we need to know how cells are transforming and all of that. And it's not too long ago that it was really expensive, and I think that helps significantly with why we're finally doing it.
Yeah. Even
though we've known about them for a long time. It's like we're finally we have the tools to dive deeper.
So there's definitely limited research in stem cell pathways, how they're doing what they're doing, but studying these stem cells and the blastomas of planarians and axolotls could one day coax human cells to behave similarly. That way we can see if we can tap into such regenerative properties. And one day maybe humans can regrow or graft injured or missing tissues.
That would be fantastic for amputees. Like, the application of this is just crazy.
Exactly. So it has
these are just two of them, two random creatures that we found that could lead to human regeneration.
Right. So it has the potential to regrow limbs. You can regrow part of your heart for heart conditions.
Cool.
Your spinal cord for any sort of injuries. Yeah, dude. And who knows, maybe if you lose part of your head, part of your brain, you can regrow those. I mean, if axolotls can regrow your brain, maybe you can.
We could do it.
And you also mentioned the applications to age. So it's giving us clues into how they repair damaged organs or lost limbs. And just the potential at reversing age and reversing cancer damage.
Yeah, I mean, it could help with dementia, Alzheimer's, everything where that has to do with signals dwindling or stuff just kind of dying out. Like, if we have the ability to regenerate, then, the world is our oyster.
Right. So that was all I have for the planarians.
That's cool.
Our little flatworms.
So they're flat little babies that can actually...
You can chop them up into 1,000,000 pieces and just get 1,000,000 flatworms.
Yes, I do recommend looking it up.
They're cute.
They're cute.
We'll post a picture of them.
They have videos too of the division process where they break it down week by week, and it really is fascinating to see because you can see when the little eyes form, the little googly eyes.
Yeah,
you can see
the eyes on top.
It's fascinating to watch, and I never would have thought that an organism could do it. It's quite alien that something here can, from a little bit of itself, completely regen.
And similarly with the deer, our little deer has also entered the safe zone.
All right.
Go deer. Entered. So like I said, deer antlers are actually the only mammalian appendage capable of regeneration forming from that blastoma site.
Is there a limit like there was for lottles? Was it 5?
No, it's actually more than 5 because I don't know the limit, but it's each and every year of maturity. Yeah, so once they reach a certain level of puberty, they regenerate their antlers year after year until...
a certain... Maybe till the hormones die out and stop signaling to create
it's age-related.
Okay, got it.
So like I said, it forms from the blastoma site, and from that we get those stem cell epigenetic processes. So antlers are renewed from that blastoma site, and they contain antler stem cells, AS cells for short. So because this tissue develops at the top of that pedicel, and it is directly related to the hormones, maybe we can tap into the hormone levels as well as the genetics of the blastoma site. I'm not sure if you can put male deer testosterone into a topical gel. I don't think that would be the solution.
I think if you did, you would have to be careful about going into the woods.
Oh, nothing like a nice perfume, cologne to attract them.
Yeah, I don't know if that one would be as simple as putting into
I don't know either.
a gel, but it is still pretty cool.
But I did want to say, this was hypothetically. It was hard to do research on, but we did find a couple sources that say, hypothetically, if you surgically removed and grafted an antler to a different part of the body, it will grow there. So you could get antlers out the butt. You could get antlers on your legs.
You can get a unicorn.
Yeah, you can literally create a unicorn by... Which I had some questions myself, because first
has
of
not
all,
been done. It
I
can.
thought you had to have a pedicel, that little stump. That's what they grow off of. That's why they're only growing
But I think
there.
they graft that too. Like, I think they take all of it.
They take the stump,
And
and
they
then
take
put
the stump. Yeah,
and
maybe.
then they wait for the antler to grow.
Yeah, I think they take baby stump and they could put it either on the butt. And I think one of the ones said like inner hind leg or something like that. And if you transplant the whole thing, almost like a skin graft, like you do with humans, but if you do the whole thing, I think then a horn, technically, if it has vascularization, could form. That would be so inconvenient to have that on your inner thigh.
That would be.
You just would not be able to move around or do anything.
But so human implications, I think, are the same as the flatworm and the axolotl.
Yeah.
Studying these blastomas, studying these pedicels, give us a little more insight into the pathways of these stem cells, the genetics, the genetic code of these undifferentiated cells, and they can lead to just heaps of new research on limb regeneration, skin grafts,
all sorts of stuff.
yeah, repair of existing organs, things like that.
Well, and there could be like people who have like kidney failure or stuff like that. You know, like maybe instead of having kidney surgery, there's ways that we are able to do it ourselves.
Just regenerate your kidney.
Yeah, and it's important. It's important to bring up, and when we talked a whole bunch about like stem cells and everything, and stem cell research, at least with humans right now, is very, controversial and has been for quite some time. So it's cool that we are finding other avenues to where like, okay, cool, maybe we unlock this ancient regenerative power that we've had in our code this whole time. And we won't even need to mess with that, right? We just have to turn something off, turn something on, or add a little bit of spazazz into it.
Add a little bit of
That's a little bit of spice, a little sparkle. And that's all we have for you today. We have talked about 3 freaky deekies, the axolotl, the planarian, and the deer.
Thanks for joining us today as we discovered the superpower of regeneration.
Ooh.
If you have any questions, comments, or if you have a freaky fauna you want us to cover, send us a message on Insta, or you can email us at info@freakyfaunafiles.com.
Next time, join us as we visit Australia, where everything wants to kill you.
Again, this is
The chicken
and the egg. Remember, it's best to stay out of the danger zone and in the safe zone. Stay freaky.